Okay, so what we're going to talk about today, and it may get a bit confusing with the mic, right? But we'll try. Is how or what the tax issues are with relocating from the UK to Gibraltar as an individual. We've only got 20 minutes, so we can't cover corporates and withholding tax and all those things that you will obviously want to know about. Take competent advice in all the relevant jurisdictions, preferably from a CTA or a barrister. And so let's imagine the scenario where I'm in the UK, I've got a business, I want to relocate to Gibraltar. Now, Harry, what's the first thing I really need to worry about from a UK perspective?
Well, that very much depends. And just before I do that, I will say I can shout very loudly and I'm not afraid to use it. So everyone at the back, bear that in mind. So there are several things that you would want to be thinking about initially, but obviously we're here to talk about tax. So the key tax issue is going to be where you are resident. Resident has a specific meaning from a tax perspective. In fact, it has more than one specific meaning from a tax perspective. In the scenario Graham's described, we would be looking at your residence from the perspective of the UK statutory residence test, which is a set of criteria which determine whether or not you are resident in the UK or resident somewhere else. Generally speaking, your residence will be a specific residence for the purposes of the statutory residence test, but of course, as long as it's not UK, we don't care where it is.
So just for those of us that don't live and breathe tax like we do, what's the consequences of being resident in the UK from a tax perspective?
So if you are a UK tax resident, that effectively means that you will pay tax on your worldwide income and your on your gains in the UK. Though gains is a bit more complicated. It may also, dependent on how long you have been resident in the UK, determine whether or not you are going to pay inheritance tax here, which obviously can be very significant in amount. So it is a big deal. It is a huge issue. If you have been based in the UK, the chances are that you are resident in the UK. So the key question then becomes, how do I stop being resident in the UK?
So it's not just as simple as are you in the country for 183 days, is it? The stat rest test is more complex than just a straight take out, right?
If you are in the UK for more than 183 days in a year, then it is simply that you are UK resident. But if you haven't been in the UK for 183 days, you may well still be UK resident. So no, it's not straightforward. And indeed, the statutory residence test takes up, and it's actually a very good test. In my view, it's better than the position that we had before, which was sort of like a case law-based assessment. But it takes up a lot of paper. There's a lot of detail in it. There are different tests dependent on whether or not you've been in the UK you've been a UK resident in the years preceding the year you're looking at, or if you weren't a UK resident. It's different if you die in a particular year. So it's not straightforward. In essence, you first of all look at a set of automatic tests, and the automatic tests may determine if you are a UK resident or if you are not a UK resident. So there are a set of automatic UK tests and automatic non-UK tests. And if you meet one of the automatic non-UK tests, which generally centre around spending very little time here, but again vary dependent on how many of the prior years you've been here, things like that. If you meet one of those, you will not be UK resident under the SLT and you can ignore it. Conversely, if you meet the automatic UK tests, which again focus on time spent here, the most straightforward one of them is that you've been in the UK for 183 days in the tax year in question, so more than 50% of the time. But if you meet one of those automatic tests, you will definitely be UK resident. Where it gets more complicated, and where it gets more complicated for people leaving and arriving in the UK, is when you don't meet any of the automatic tests, because then you have to look at something called the sufficient ties tests, because of course there's more than one, and why would we restrict ourselves to just one test? And the sufficient ties tests look at a variety of factors, like where you have a home, where you work, where your family are, how many days you have spent in the UK. And what gets complicated about those tests is you can effectively, depending on how many other ties you have, you get a different number of days that you can spend here. So the fewest you have is 90. So if you have sort of 2 or 3 other ties and you spend 90 days here, you also have what's called a 90-day tie. But if you have fewer connecting factors, fewer of the other connecting factors, then you might get up to 121 days that you can spend in the UK. So the problem is, it's really complicated. When you arrive or when you leave, you need really detailed records of where you've been. So it's fairly straightforward if you are leaving and you've pretty much been in the UK and solely in the UK. But if, as with a lot of people leaving, you have a situation where you have factors connecting you to other jurisdictions, it's not straightforward, and nor is the record keeping that you need to do to be able to prove that you met the requirements that you said you met. And with the recent UK law changes from April of this year, we are in a position where HMRC are going to be far more interested in checking up on what years you're a resident in, because there's now a lot more in terms of tax that turns on that.
Yeah, so I mean, it is complicated, and that's the reason why it needs to be done properly if you're going to relocate and you're hoping that relocating has an effect for tax. If you make a mess of this, and it's the exit from the UK, which I think is the most important. The Gibraltar rules are really quite simple and user-friendly, but the exit from the UK is the most complex piece, and you do need solid advice.
Yeah, so really, I think in terms of the exit from the UK, if you have been here for the long term, you will have to literally leave the UK, sever all ties with it, get your family out to be able to leave in that year one. And that's a really big ask. So you may need to take a more staged approach and accept that you're going to be winding into non-UK residence. So it is difficult. And a lot of the time what we find, and this is a very practical approach, but what we find is people who try to go in one sort of big, yes, I'm leaving on the 3rd of April and I'll be non-UK resident in the next tax year, they find the implementation of it, the impact that has on their life, to be impossible. And so they don't do what they were advised to do. So it may be that you need to look at a staged approach because of how stringent that requirement is for that first year.
Yes, so the key to this is plan it, right? You plan it properly, don't take it lightly, take the proper advice. But then from the Gibraltar side, we do have two main routes into residence in Gibraltar. One is category 2, which is more for the retiree, I suppose, not worker, because of the rules around working once you're in Gibraltar. And one is HEPS, high executive possessing special skills, and they give very good tax treatments. So there are general benefits from being residents in Gibraltar because of our tax system. So, I mean, I just heard you talking a moment ago with one of the guests about what the general advantages are of the Gibraltar system.
Yes, so one of the huge advantages for being based in Gibraltar is that you have a largely you have a largely territorial basis of taxation, which means that mostly Gibraltar only taxes in Gibraltar things which arise in Gibraltar. So that can give a significant benefit. You have obviously lower rates of tax pretty much universally than the UK does. And you don't have capital gains tax or inheritance tax. So where those assets are not chargeable in another jurisdiction, that can be a significant benefit. To pause on the capital gains tax there. Capital gains are only charged in the UK on UK residents or in relation to property that derives substantially all its value from UK situate real estate. So if you are resident in Gibraltar, from a capital gains tax perspective, for example, there are very significant benefits. The other general benefit outside of sort of the HEPS regime, Cat 2, is that Gibraltar and the UK have a really quite good double tax treaty. So even if you remain UK resident under UK domestic law, if you can be Gibraltar treaty resident, which we don't have time to go into, but which is possible even if you are UK resident for UK law purposes, you may be able to access some very beneficial provisions of that treaty that I know of that are particularly useful, dividend income and interest income. But if you're the right type of entity or individual, they can be very beneficially engaged with.
So just to gallop through the benefits of HEPS and Cat 2 from a GIB tax perspective, HEPS is designed for people that have skills which aren't available in the workforce. You have to live in a designated property. Designated is not the right word. A property of the right quality. There's not like an area where they all live together. And you have to earn more than £160,000 a year. If you do, your tax is capped at the tax on £160,000 a year, and that also covers dividends and interest issued by the same source as the source for which you got the certificate. So that basically you can, as long as you're expanding the economy in Gibraltar. I know that the test is stringently applied, but it's a really useful and powerful tool, and it encourages entrepreneurism and increasing the nature of the economy in GIB. So with Cat 2, that, as I said earlier on, it's more really aimed at the kind of people who are going to go and retire as Gibraltar, because there is a restriction on working in Gibraltar. For a Cat 2, you can't carry out trade, business, professional vacation. In GIB, if you do, you need permission from the finance centre, and you will pay tax at 39% on that. Other than that, it's essentially a foreign income and gains exclusion rule. So you will pay a minimum of £37,000 and a maximum of £42,500, depending on how you arrange your affairs. But and again, you have to live in one of the designated properties. I'm sure Mike could help. Other estate agents are available. So there's a long-standing schemes. They're sort of akin to residence by investment, but they don't give you, as part of the status, you aren't guaranteed to be ordinarily resident in Gibraltar. You still need to do the time to, say, access the treaty that Harry was talking about. So it's a great status, but you still need to think in a more expansive way to arrange your affairs. It's not a shield from residence in other jurisdiction. Let's say you spent 300 days a year in Italy, and your entire life was based there. If you produce your Cat 2 certificate, then good luck with that. But so you need to think in a wider way. The mantra is always take advice, take advice.
So yeah, just to reiterate what Grahame is saying and give you a very, very quick and basic stumble through some principles, some very basic legal principles. Just because the law in the UK is different to the law in Gibraltar, is different to the law in Italy, just because you're tax resident in the UK for UK tax purposes, that doesn't mean that you're tax resident in the UK for Gibraltar or Italian law purposes, or indeed that because you are tax resident somewhere else, you cease to be resident for tax purposes in that place, in that jurisdiction. So you cannot, and it amazes me that in 2025 we're still saying this, you cannot simply say, well, I'm resident in Gibraltar, therefore I'm not resident anywhere else. And honestly, the number of clients I get and say, yes, but I'm a resident here, so I can't be resident there. If that were the case, we would not really need double tax treaties, because double tax treaties, a lot of what they are aimed at is dealing with the situation where you are resident in two places. So a double tax treaty represents a halfway house if you're struggling to get out of, say, the UK quickly enough. But just because you're resident in Gibraltar, or even indeed because you're under one of these schemes to encourage certain people to come to Gibraltar, that doesn't mean that it's going to help you with your UK tax status. That's a separate issue that you need to deal with separately and appropriately.
So just to highlight another pitfall, we also need to be conscious about being tax residents in Spain. And Spain has yet another test. So UK has its statutory residence test, Gibraltar has a simple day count, Spain has a test which says 183 days, any presence is a day, or your centre of economic and vital interests is in Spain, which means do you earn most of your money there? Do your children go to school there? Does your wife live there? Or your husband live there? And then it's got a nice little kicker at the bottom that says, oh, but we will assume you're resident in the same place as your spouse. So if your wife lives in Sotogrande and you essentially live in Gibraltar, then Spanish Hacienda will assume that you live with your spouse unless you can prove otherwise.
Is that an assumption that can be overturned with evidence? So it's rebuttable.
Yeah, it's a rebuttable presumption, but it's not entirely clear what strong evidence means. So I think the lesson to take from this, from the whole thing, I think I'll get conscious that we might be getting near to the end. It's very possible to do things which are very beneficial, but they need to be approached with a seriousness and the backing of good advice. If you don't take good advice, you will almost inevitably fall into a hole accidentally.
And if you don't follow that good advice, it's all very well taking the advice, going, I've got the advice, putting it in your back pocket, and then doing whatever it is you feel like, which time and time again we do see. People say, oh, I should advice, but you can do any of it. So how does that help you? You have to implement it. So it's all very well to have a tax advisor say to you, we can do this, that, and the other whizzy thing. But the real question you have to ask yourself is, can you live with it?
And so there you go. So that was fun, wasn't it? Yeah. So we always finish every episode with the disclaimer, right? Nothing in this amounts to advice. It's just a conversation between two people talking about tax. Thank you very much for listening to us, and John, back to you.